welcome back to the Glow Up Girl podcast. All right, let's welcome Jayla to the show. Welcome, Jayla.
It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get started by having you tell the audience listening or watching who you are and what you do?
So, I am an entrepreneur at heart, that's for sure. Although I've had a zigzag kind of career that's gone from corporate to entrepreneurship, back to corporate, back to entrepreneurship. And that has spanned from working with lifestyle companies to starting my own wine company to now being mostly in real estate investing and vacation rental management. And I'm also the busy mom of an 8-year-old. And I live in Santa Barbara. So nice sunny day here today.
Yeah, it definitely is. If you're not watching this, it is beautiful. Her background is amazing. I just saw this first thing that caught my eye was just like the sun. I mean, it's been raining here. I live in Atlanta. It's been raining here. So I'm like, oh, the sun, look at it. It's pretty.
I grew up
Well,
in New Hampshire, so yeah,
oh,
I do not take the sun for granted here.
yes,
I appreciate
yes. So Jay, let's start. Now you have very interesting background, as you mentioned, but you also were on Shark Tank. And I know
Yeah.
a lot of entrepreneurs out there probably think about like, can I go on there? How can I go on there? Can you talk a little bit about your experience on the show?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, Shark Tank was a little bit of a Hail Mary. I spent all this time going through the process of raising money to launch my company. I ran into massive production issues, almost had to close the business. And I had an advisor who kept telling me, you got to apply to Shark Tank. You got to apply to Shark Tank. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to go on that show. And finally, I was going to meet him for coffee. And I was like, I just need to apply so I can tell him I did it. I applied. And then, of course, I get the call to go on. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm going to do this. So jumped through a ton of hoops and I practiced like crazy. I watched like every episode. I wrote down all the questions the sharks asked. And it was an amazing experience, totally legit show. Like they know nothing about you, when you go out there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you're out there for an hour and they end up editing it down to like 10 or 12 minutes. But I remember the producer saying, if you pee your pants, we're not stopping recording. Like anything that happens out there. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is terrifying. So anyway, somehow managed to hold my own and got the deal with Mark Cuban. And it was one of those like just incredible life, experiences and moments. But
Mm-hmm.
it also kind of led me off of my path a little bit, which is interesting because then you're on this quick growth trajectory that I
Mm-hmm.
realized at one point later on that that wasn't truly what I wanted in my life. So it's a great experience, but it was kind of interesting looking back, what it evolved into. So I highly recommend it. Like, man, you cannot be, it's like a marketing injection into your business,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
great, but
Yeah.
you got to be
Yeah.
ready for it.
And it sort of works both ways, right? If you get a deal or if you don't get a deal, there's still free marketing.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely worth it. Absolutely. Either way. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So now you said it was a bit of a like, it was a Hail Mary for you in your business and you did it and you got a deal. And so for people out there, because some people, may say, well, maybe I'm not ready or, I've tried and I didn't get a call back, but people are still trying to figure out like, how do I secure funding for my business? And that's one of the things that you do with your podcast. You talk the Seed Money podcast. Let's start there because before I start asking you all these questions about funding and your experience, can you talk about why you started it? What listeners can expect when they tune into the show?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess I forgot to even mention that in the beginning there. So, yeah, I started a podcast last May called Seed Money. And part of it, I got into real estate investing. It's great, it's lucrative. I do enjoy it, but I don't feel like I'm doing a lot to give back. And I
Mhm.
absolutely love that startup phase of
Mhm.
business. Like you have to have so much passion and
Mhm.
drive to like start a business and to go out and raise money. It is not an easy endeavor,
Right.
right?
Right.
And when I started that, I had no experience as an entrepreneur. It was in a recession, 2008. I had no experience in the industry I was in. I was in a very tough space of alcohol. I had all these things working against me. And I remember just being so intimidated by this like Silicon Valley startup, like
Mhm.
dude vibe, you know? And
Mhm. Mhm.
there's so many people who don't live in Silicon Valley and don't identify with that, but still need funding for
Mhm.
their business. And I also believe that it's really important to kind of have your personal lifestyle goals, a clear vision for that before
Mhm.
you go out and raise funding, because very often what ends up happening is you're kind of in that I'm desperate to get funding place,
Mhm.
and you're just like ready to take funding from any investor. But as soon as
Mhm.
you form that relationship, I mean, it's a partnership, and then, you're trying to hit goals that your investors are expecting. So the more
Mhm.
you can align, your company's goals with your personal goals from the, beginning, I think the
Mhm.
more sustainable it is. So that's my goal with the podcast, is really just to help people, one, learn tactically how to go out and raise money,
Mhm.
structure, pitfalls, how to pitch, all that stuff. And then
Mhm.
also some of the mindset that you need, because that's half the battle. And then, yeah, I think, like I said, just some of the pitfalls, that the hard lessons I learned, and hard
Mhm.
lessons I know a lot of my friends learned as well,
Mhm.
going through that process.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's great for people to have a place to go and listen. So if you're listening and watching us, make sure you check out Seed Money Podcast. If you are an entrepreneur starting or growing a business, or share it with your friends as well. So let's talk about what would you say was like your biggest challenge in securing funding? And what did you do to overcome that?
So, I mean, I'd say my biggest challenge was really I had no connections. I didn't have wealthy friends and family,
Hmm.
to just, that would make things a lot easier
Hmm. Hmm.
in some ways.
Hmm.
So and then again, I came from this action sports footwear industry, and now I'm in this alcohol space. So I couldn't even
Hmm.
really rely on my previous corporate network. So I was starting from scratch. And I decided, I'm going to go back to school for my MBA. Now, I would not recommend that. That was a very expensive way to network. I think there are much less expensive ways to network now, but that at the time was what I did. And I committed to, I'm just going to go to every event. I am just going to go to every opportunity I can find to network. And I just need to start meeting people and talking to people and
Hmm.
putting this out there. And my first lead investor came from like, it was like 5 or 6 or 7 connections later, like met
Hmm.
someone, they introduced me to the next person, they introduced me to the next person, and it finally got me to that lead investor. So, I overcame that lack of connections by just
Hmm.
getting out there. And now there are so many, there's masterminds, and there really are so many ways to network online, which is amazing. There's platforms for finding investors like Founder Suite, but there is still an element of good old fashioned going out
Hmm.
and meeting people in person that I really do believe is important. So,
Right.
yeah, it's
Yeah, no, I think what you said is really key, because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, just hit up your networks, or ask your family and friends. And I think a lot of times people are like, like you said, I mean, if you don't have rich friends and family, I mean, most people are like, I can't do that.
yeah.
Um, but I think one of the things I'd like to ask you is, when you were going through that, so you said, like the number of connections it took for you to get that investor. How did you deal with like self-doubt as you were going through that? Or were there moments when you had like imposter syndrome, because you mentioned being in a different space from where you'd worked previously in your career?
Yeah, I definitely felt like a fish out of water. Like I would go talk to food and beverage buyers at big hotels and distributors, and I
Hmm.
I remember just being completely intimidated. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm talking about here. Typically, what I found works really well is just kind of being honest about that and asking
Mhm.
people for help. Like, hey, here's my idea. I do not know this industry inside and out. I would so appreciate your insight. And people want to help people for the most part. Of course,
Mhm.
there's, some jerks out there, but for the most part, people want to help people. And I think just being honest and upfront with what you need and what you're looking for, it helps eliminate that imposter syndrome because you're not pretending you have to know everything. You're just kind of
Mhm.
owning, yeah, I don't know everything, and that's okay. I'm determined. So I think that's the second thing is just determination is so
Mhm.
powerful. I had a little sticky note on my computer. I had two actually. One said raise $1 million and the other one said get into Whole Foods. And
Mhm.
I just every day I stared at that and I was like, I am going to do this. I am going to do this. So
Mhm.
you just have to, doubt, of course, creeps in. Sometimes you just have to like push it aside,
Mhm.
focus on the end goal, and trust that some way, shape, or form you'll get there. It's really hard to
Mhm.
connect the dots, but you can focus on that end, that
Right.
goal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, I mean, what would you say, if people are thinking, well, I may not be at the stage of they may be at the very beginning stage of starting a business, but in need of funding. And they're not at a stage where they can go on to like, a Shark Tank. Maybe they can't apply just yet because they haven't made any money. But do you think sometimes, what do you say to people? Because sometimes it can be intimidating to go to people and ask for things when they're like, well, have you sold anything yet? And someone's like, no, I just have really amazing idea and I need because let's be real, a lot of times the funding is needed to create the thing that you want to put out there. Because a lot of times people may just use their own money to like get the prototypes established. So what would you say to someone who's saying, well, I want to try to raise funds and I don't know where to start, but it don't have sales, and maybe I've just got enough money to like get some samples made.
yeah, so that was exactly basically what I did. I didn't have any sales before I raised the first round. I used credit cards, I cashed in my 401k, I did all
Mhm.
that. What I would say to do is number one, just you have to believe money is not the obstacle.
Mhm.
I always believed that, there's tons of money out there. And there are people with lots of money who don't have the ideas or
Mhm.
passion to execute an idea. And what I've learned since is like, that's actually more common than not. And those
Mhm.
people want to help and they want to use their money and they want to like feed off a little bit of your passion, what you're excited about, right?
Mhm.
So, I think for that person who maybe is just developing their first samples, the best thing they can do is start talking to people right now, even just saying they might not have a pitch deck or they're not ready to go out and raise funding, but
Mhm.
it's a great time to just start asking for people's advice. So, hey, I might want to raise money at some point to fund this
Mhm.
idea that I have. Do you know anybody I could talk to who's an angel investor who could give
Mhm.
me some feedback? Because then you're going to, so let's say you get introduced to that angel investor, you ask them honest questions like what's been your experience, funding startups, and then you say, hey, can I keep you posted how my progress goes, right? Because no one's going to
Mhm.
write a check usually on the first meeting. They want to see
Mhm.
progress and traction. So you might not have sales, but a few months later, you might be like, hey, quick update. I got, my prototype done. I've met with two accounts. I got a couple letters of intent. So it's building those relationships even
Mhm.
early on can be really, really powerful. And you
Mhm.
can do it in a very authentic way where you're just saying, hey, I would love to like talk to an actual investor just to get an idea from them.
Mhm.
Not, I'm not ready right now, but I just want to get some
Mhm.
feedback from somebody. And again, most of the time people want to help and are open to that.
Mhm. I think that's some really great advice because I think a lot of times people just sort of shut down or it's like analysis paralysis, right? Because of that thing where they're like, I don't have sales, I don't have a sample. But I think there's something pretty cool about, like you said, just asking to talk to an angel investor, just figuring out like what do they look for? What makes
Mhm.
them invest? And then, I mean, like you said, they're the people that want to help people. If they feel your passion and feel your energy, most times I feel like people will like buy into that and they'll be like, yep, so you just keep me posted. Just, keep moving. And then you come back and then who knows, you get the money.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, I love that. So, what's a piece of advice you would give to someone who is might be questioning whether or not to follow the thing that they're passionate about?
Oh man, I would just say go for it. You only live once, I am definitely, well, okay, let me take that back a little bit. Understand your level of risk, I think is important. I
Mm-hmm.
am a risk taker. I definitely, but I take calculated risks. Like
Mm-hmm.
I started that company
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I was willing to put money on credit cards, cash in my 401k, but I never like personally guaranteed any loans. I didn't go past a line where I felt like if this thing doesn't work out, it's really gonna kind of screw me over. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you have to really understand your level of risk and then maybe push that a tiny bit, if it's something you're really, really passionate about. But, you know, don't be afraid to pivot. I've pivoted so many times. I'm about to be, 50 years old in a couple years, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I still have who knows what I'll be doing in 10 years. And I love that
Mm-hmm.
part of life, so it's like I don't know, you're never too old, you're never too young. It's just you can always put something off. But I think it's just take action and go for it,
Mm-hmm.
and see where it leads. You never know. You won't know unless
Yeah.
you try, that's for sure.
That's true. And I like that you talked about like the risk because yes, there's a element to like when you're going to go for something like it is a risk.
Mhm.
And but I like how you spoke about like you didn't go too far. I mean, you did some things on credit cards. You were willing to cash in your 401k because and you didn't do loans or anything like that, and it's just sort of assessing like how much do I believe in myself and what I'm doing, and what am I willing to sacrifice, because it's a sacrifice on your part too if you really want to see this take off. And sometimes the very thing holding us back is where we are like unwilling to do that one additional step.
So true.
Yeah. So yeah, I really appreciate you speaking to that. And I know you mentioned earlier this founder suite. So in case there are people who are saying, I know there are a lot of sites out there where you can like fundraise or get money for your business. Are there others that you recommend that you've seen success with?
Yeah, I used Angel List for a later round of funding, but I just interviewed the founder of Founder Suite, Nathan Beckard, and it's a great platform. I think they have like 200,000 investors and you can filter by industry. So
Mm.
you can create a login for free and just play around with it. And then I think it's like an annual cost. Um, they have some amazing new AI tools where it will scan your LinkedIn and maybe find a mutual connection with one of their investors
Mm.
so you can ask for an intro, because that's the hardest part is,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here's an angel group online, but how do I actually get in front of them? So they have some really robust, cool tools that are
Mm-hmm.
incredibly helpful. And so I think that one, I think Angel List is another good one. And just kind of starting also with your local angel groups. Most small cities or big cities have angel groups.
Mm-hmm.
Starting there, I think it can be tough to actually get funding from an angel group because they do get pitched so many companies.
Mm-hmm.
They only invest in, a few, but you can still make some great connections and get good feedback. And that was one of the things I did early on was I pitched at these like pitch competitions that these angel
Mm-hmm.
groups put on. And it wasn't necessarily that I didn't get any funding from them, but it was such great practice. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
forced me to get my ducks in a row. So any of those things, there's accelerators are another great way. A lot of time you
Mm-hmm.
can go into an accelerator, they help you put your deck together, and then they have all kinds of, connections and networks and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Awesome. No, I really appreciate you giving such good information today for people. So, Jill, let me ask you because you've had a pretty successful journey. How has your definition of success evolved since you started?
yeah, quite a bit, I would say. So, I think I had that 7 years in corporate and then I started that company. the wine company. And my goal with that was to like sell it for $1 gazillion because partially because I thought that's just what you do if you start a
Mhm.
company at that point.
Mhm.
And partially that was how I got funding, was selling that story, right? And in order to continue down that path, I basically killed myself. I was working 16 hours a day. I got so burnt out. It was wearing on, my husband. I could tell he's so supportive, but at a certain
Mhm.
point, it's like if you skip every friend outing, all, everything,
Yeah.
it's not very fun to be married to that person, right? So it wasn't all of a sudden, but I realized one day I was like, whoa, this is not what I want. Like I have high blood
Mhm.
pressure. I'm sacrificing my relationships. We put off starting a family. I was like,
Mhm.
what am I doing? The dream is no longer the dream. And I started this because I just wanted to work for myself. Now I am basically a slave to my company in a lot of ways. I'm
Right.
just like living, breathing everything to do with this business. And so I made the very, very hard decision to pivot out of it. And it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made.
Mhm.
But I realized, and actually what happened is, so I took a year off, I had my son, and I was like, I don't want to ever start another business. I just want to collect a paycheck. I'm so fried. And so I ended up going back to a corporate job as VP of sales and marketing for a music company. And then I got there for a few years and I was like, wait a minute, I overcorrected. I do want to work for myself. I just don't want to go down that path. So I hired a coach and I had to get really clear on what is it that I want in my life.
Mhm. Right.
And I realized it's not all about money. I love making money,
Mhm.
but I want flexibility and I want to
Mhm.
work when I want to
Yeah.
work, and I want
Yes.
my work to revolve around my lifestyle,
Mhm.
not the other way around. So I can say, it's always an evolution, but I'm finally at that point. And I have busier times than maybe I'd like to be. There's stuff pops up, of course, when you have your own business and everything. But for the most part, I really do control my calendar. I
Mhm.
work when I want to work. I have time to exercise. I took 5 weeks off last summer. So it's taken me a while, but I'm,
Mhm.
very close to there. And I still have to catch myself. I think the nature of people who are motivated and excited,
Mhm.
it's easy to go back down that path of just working, working, working,
Right. Mhm.
so I have to
Yeah.
remind myself that that is not.
Awesome. No, that's really great to hear. And I love that. Thank you for just the transparency because I think it's really important for people to hear because you can become a slave to your own business and you can burn out. And it looks like you got to burn out and then you went to back to the job and said, not really, not what I wanted. So, and I think there's something in there where you said like the flexibility. And I think a lot of times that's what entrepreneurs are really looking for at the heart of it is that you want to be able to control your time. You want control and you want to be able to control when you do things. Um, so I think that's pretty awesome. All right, tell our audience how they can connect to you.
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best place. Jayla Siciliano. I'm happy to help if anybody has an idea, needs feedback or anything like that. Seed Money Podcast. Just look it up on podcast platforms. It's on YouTube also. And yeah, I'm on Instagram, but I don't really do much there. Kid
Okay, cool.
photos.
All right, well, we'll drop some links in the show notes as well. All right, now we're going to transition to three things with Jayla. I'm going to ask you three more questions that helps our audience get to know you a little bit better. The first one is how do you start and end the day?
Oh man, I wish I had a better answer for the start. I do look at my phone right when, I usually wake up within 5 minutes, but then I do put it away just to make sure there's nothing like urgent.
Mhm.
And then after that, one of my visions was to have a house with a view where I could see the ocean, and we finally have. And so I really do enjoy the sun. I get up early and watch the sunrise pretty much every day. That's like my favorite part of the day. And then the hustle bustle of getting kid off to school and all that.
Mhm.
And how I do end my day the same way every day. And that is I read basically my roadmap, which is my vision. And then, and I want that to be the last thing in my brain before I go to sleep every night.
Mhm.
So I do read that pretty,
Awesome.
yeah, consistently every single night.
I love that. All right, number two, what's a goal or an intention that you set for yourself this year?
One of my main goals this year was just to be consistent with the podcast. I
Hmm.
love doing it. And when I started, this was actually I had to really overcome some imposter syndrome to start the podcast.
Hmm.
And once I started it, it was easy, but I had this like big buildup and it was fear of judgment and all that stuff, but now I absolutely love doing it. But leading up to that, I was like, I can't control anything except how consistent I am and that I just keep going. So, of course, I review the downloads and stuff, but my entire goal is just to keep going with that podcast and stay
Hmm.
consistent.
Hmm.
And I, at some point, will evolve it into kind of something more because I just love
Hmm.
doing it. But that's my main goal this year is prioritizing that just enough to stay consistent every week,
Hmm.
put out a new episode.
Yes, awesome. All right, and last, where are you currently finding inspiration?
Podcasts, I gotta say, that's part of the
Hmm.
reason I wanted to start one. I think I listen to so many podcasts. I love your podcast. You put out great content. I think all these conversations, back to that point about networking,
Hmm.
it's amazing how much how much information and me getting my MBA, right? That seems so,
Hmm.
of course, there's theory and all that stuff, but the amount of self-educating we can do this day and age
Yes.
is incredible,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes.
I do love inspiring podcasts, and more than what I do is what I don't do. I really do, especially right now. I try to stay away from the news.
Hmm.
I follow a couple people to feel at least, so I stay informed.
Hmm.
But for me, the news impacts me negatively. And in order to
Hmm.
stay in a positive headspace, I try to just focus on, more positive content and
Hmm.
eliminate negative content. I've removed my social icons from my phone.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I hop on when I'm on my computer if I need to for work purposes, but
Hmm.
I've really tried to kind of shield
Yeah.
out a lot of that right now. So
Yeah, yeah, that's really smart. Okay, well, Jayla, it's been so nice talking to you. Like I said, you've given us such great information today for entrepreneurs who are really looking to see how they can fund their businesses. I really have enjoyed this conversation because I feel like it's so needed. And a lot of times people just don't really know. I mean, it's one thing, you follow people and they put out information about, oh yeah, apply for this grant and do this. But I feel like you've given a real life, like tangible information that we can use. And then if you want more, because I know you're out there listening, watching, wanting more, you can go listen to Jayla's podcast. Seed Money podcast, and you can head over there and you can get even more great information from her. So before I let you go, I'm going to ask you one last question, and it is to leave the audience with three things you'd like them to take away from our conversation today.
Oh, three things. I think don't be afraid to put yourself out there, and talk to people about what those dreams are and what, you want and what it is you want to create, because you just never know where those conversations will lead. And align your personal goals with your career goals because they intersect more than we realize. And I believe
Mhm.
it's so important to have those aligned. And then, yeah, try to focus on the inspiring stuff, and especially if you're in that startup phase or you're thinking about going down the fundraising path, you have to be so laser focused and build up that confidence and really shielding yourself from, anything negative, and keeping yourself in a good positive bubble while you're going down that will only help. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming and spending time with me today. You can always come back.
thank you for having me. This is so fun. Love it.
Fantastic. Well, stay tuned, everyone. I'll be right back.